So as a continuation from our Dash basics, we're going to continue on here in the Dash Applications notebook, and we're going to be in this portion reviewing the data table itself. Real quick, just as a wrap up from the last section, I did not cover as much on the DBC side because there's going to be more when we get to that with buttons and things we add to the dashboard later. But it is important to note that the DBC is actually being used here. While we're not calling a component from DBC, this Dash Space Lab, or this Dash Bootstrap Space Lab theme, is actually doing a lot of helpful things. So when you look at the color scheme and the text, the styling, the sizing, that is actually being defined by our theme. The tables we are adding a little bit too, but this will become more prevalent and will become more evident as we add additional items to these Dash applications and their components. So don't be alarmed if we don't cover a lot of that right now. We will get more into that as we move forward. Alright, so with that, let's go ahead and jump into the data table itself. So this Dash data table, we're going to actually be using a Dash core component version of the data table. Now there is a Dash Bootstrap version, which will allow you to use again the simplified view here in our Dash core components, and you can go to the table section and you can utilize their versions of it, and you get a lot more of the appeal of the themes. But for me, the tables actually lose a lot of configurability that I'm not a big fan of. So you can come down here and you can see all of these items that you can define for the tables, but if you compare that to the core components and we go to a table, a data table, which we'll just show you here in the live example, but if you go to the data table in there, you have just a lot more configurability when it comes to filtering, when it comes to conditions where you can actually format and have the table classified differently here for you. So we'll actually show you what that looks like. But the Dash data table, we're going to be using the core component version. Alright, so with that, we're going to focus on this specific section and how it relates to what we're seeing here in the table. So inside of the table, you are actually going to see several things that should feel familiar, right? This actually should feel exactly like your Excel list that we created utilizing our momentum metrics for the symbol Apple. So we do define in this, which I'll show you here shortly, the ticker Apple, and we are utilizing our momentum strategy to look for those entry and exit opportunities. So here we're defining a Dash data table as one of our components. We are calling it, we're giving it an ID of the analysis table. We are going to define the columns of the table as our data from our by analysis. And where are we getting by analysis from? So by analysis is actually being assigned here. So we are assigning our by analysis actually equal to our momentum strategy and our symbol value. So in this example, we actually defined our symbol as Apple. So we're not going to look at multiple yet. We are going to be looking at multiple in the next section. But for this, we want to keep it simplistic. So we're going to look at the symbol Apple, and we're going to look at our momentum strategy, which we'll be referring to from our momentum strategy notebook. So where I had asked the users not to edit or save over this notebook, this is why, because we're actually going to look at momentum strategy, and we're going to utilize what we actually created in our previous section so that it feels really familiar. You're already familiar with this, you know what we're calculating, you know how we're using it. So we're going to call this notebook, and we are going to request that we run this momentum strategy versus having to build this into another notebook and try to make it as confusing as possible. So to reduce complexity, we are going to run our by analysis, or assign our by analysis as the output of our momentum strategy, passing it the symbol Apple. So if you remember, we're going to go through and run that, I would call it the momentum strategy with the triple indicators, the RSI, MACD, and stochastics, looking for those entry and exit conditions, and then we're going to return a data frame with all of this information. So when we return that data frame and assign it to by analysis, we are going to assign the columns of our data table as each of the columns in our by analysis. So for each item in by analysis, over each column in by analysis, we are going to utilize its columns to create the columns of our data table. So that's all that we're doing. We're simply defining the columns of the data table as the columns from our by analysis. Next, we're going to define the data. So this is where you have to actually pay a lot of attention to what the data table requires as the input. So it does require that the source, so right now we can't just pass it a raw data frame. We actually have to convert the data frame to a dictionary and then pass it as a record and assign that to the data of the data frame. So this is important because when we update these later, we have to make sure that we do this. We have to make sure that we're converting, because we're using data frames, we convert that data frame to a dictionary and assign it to as records, assign the records of it to the data object of our data table. So again, this is simply taking our by analysis data frame and converting it so that we can put the information into the data required to populate the table itself. From there, now we've got some stylization choices. So fixed rows, this allows us, it's more of a preference on how we set and style the table so that it sizes the headers correctly. Some of the stuff gets pretty self-explanatory. So style cells allows us to pick where the text is, the color of the text, what the height is that we want. Sorting, so when you want to be able to sort the columns, again, this is one of the reasons I like the core components. If you want to sort by these certain values, you have that capability by adding the sort action. Capability to style the header, so if you want to mess with the background color of the header, the text color, you can do that as well. Have the ability to set padding, set overflow. I'm not going to go too deep into these style choices. The style choices can be all found here within these components. So if you go to the data table object within the dash core components, you'll find a list of all of the ways that you're able to style these, and then you can kind of play with those as you see fit. And then lastly, you can put in conditional objects, which will allow you to highlight items if they meet certain criteria. So within our filter query here, if we have our by column equal to enter, we should be able to turn that, I believe I made this green, so this is the hex code for green that we've defined here. So let's go ahead, and I'm actually going to stop, close this dash application, and I'm going to rerun it because I did edit that when we jumped in here, and we're going to rerun this and just show you. So as it pulls by analysis from our momentum strategy, we are grabbing our output, assigning it to by analysis. We've created our data table as defined here, and then we're populating it with the information from by analysis. So we're creating the columns to match that data frame, and then we're populating it with the information, the corresponding information that you were used to seeing in Excel. So as you scroll down here through this will be the output, very similar to what you were used to seeing. And now, since we made that quick style edit there, you can see the ones that quickly pop out at me. And again, this is one of the reasons I like these tables so much, is you can conditionally filter and say, okay, anytime, so where I defined the text color is red, because those are likely going to be the exit points, anywhere where we have an enter, I want to be able to quickly visually see that, and I want to look for my by column if it equals enter to turn it green. And you can see that in each of these instances, we do in fact have a portion where we were able to potentially enter a trade. Now again, not many, but a few. And again, handy sort function, so if you don't want to scroll through all of them, sort, keep them to the top, allow you to quickly visualize that. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and end this section on these dash tables and how we populate them, and we'll go ahead and jump over into our last section where we will be covering the plotting of the information. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into how we're creating this closed plot and our metrics figure.